The flight attendant thought she was humiliating just another poor girl in first class. But the moment the pilot saw the silver aviation pin hanging from her faded backpack, the color drained from his face. The first-class lounge at JFK shimmered beneath warm golden lighting as businessmen in tailored suits checked their watches and wealthy travelers sipped $12 champagne beneath towering glass walls overlooking the runway. Designer luggage rolled smoothly across polished marble floors, while soft piano music floated through the air like something out of a luxury hotel commercial. Everything about the place whispered exclusivity. And then Claire Bennett walked in wearing white sneakers with slightly frayed laces, a cream cardigan, and a faded backpack that looked more suited for a college library than a premium international flight. The moment she stepped through the private boarding entrance, several heads turned. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because she looked completely out of place among the Rolex watches, silk scarves, and $1,000 carry-ons. Claire kept her eyes low as she approached the boarding counter, gently adjusting the strap on her backpack. A worn silver pin shaped like a pair of wings glinted briefly beneath the overhead lights before disappearing under the fold of fabric again. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Monica Hale did. The senior flight attendant stood behind the counter in a perfectly tailored navy uniform. Her blonde hair twisted into a flawless bun so tight it barely moved when she tilted her head. Her red lipstick curled slightly the moment she saw Claire approaching. Monica had spent 11 years working premium cabins for Atlantic Crown Airlines, and she considered herself an expert at spotting people who didn't belong. To her, luxury had a look. Expensive heels, diamond earrings, confidence polished by money. Claire had none of those things. Monica's eyes drifted slowly over the young woman's cardigan, backpack, and plain silver necklace with the same quiet judgment people reserved for strangers they believed were beneath them. Then she forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Ma'am," Monica said sweetly, though the condescension beneath her tone was impossible to miss. "Economy boarding starts downstairs." A few nearby passengers glanced over immediately. Claire blinked softly. "I know," she answered politely. "I'm in first class." The silence that followed lasted less than 2 seconds before a man, near the champagne bar, chuckled under his breath. Monica gave a tiny laugh of her own, barely disguising it behind her hand. "Of course," she replied. "May I see your boarding pass?" Claire nodded calmly and reached into her backpack. As she unzipped it, the edge of a thick cream-colored folder became visible inside. Several official-looking documents peeked from beneath it, stamped with dark blue legal seals and signatures. Monica's eyes flickered toward them for only a moment before dismissing them entirely. Probably student loans or paperwork, she assumed. Claire handed over her boarding pass with steady hands. Monica scanned it once. Then again. Her expression tightened slightly. Seat 1A. International Flagship Suite. The most expensive seat on the aircraft. Monica looked back up slowly. "Did someone book this for you?" she asked. Claire frowned faintly, confused by the question. "I booked it myself." Another businessman nearby smirked openly now, exchanging amused looks with his wife. Monica leaned one elbow lightly against the counter. "You understand this seat costs over $11,000, correct?" Claire nodded gently. "Yes." Monica stared at her for another long second, clearly waiting for nervousness or embarrassment that never came. Instead, Claire simply stood there quietly, hands folded near her backpack strap. Calm, respectful, patient. Something about that seemed to irritate Monica even more. Wealthy passengers usually acted entitled. Nervous passengers usually apologized. But Claire did neither. Monica's polished smile grew thinner. "We've had incidents before," she said louder this time, making sure nearby travelers could hear every word. "People trying to access premium cabins with fraudulent tickets." Several people looked over openly now. Claire's cheeks flushed pink beneath the lounge lighting, but her voice stayed soft. "My ticket isn't fraudulent." Monica tapped the scanner against the counter. "Then you won't mind waiting while I verify it." The room shifted subtly around them. Conversation slowed. Curious eyes lingered. A woman in pearls whispered something to her husband while glancing toward Claire's sneakers. Monica enjoyed moments like this more than she should have. She enjoyed being the gatekeeper of luxury. "You can step aside for now," Monica added with another practiced smile. "We'll let the actual first-class passengers board first." A few people laughed quietly. Claire swallowed hard, but nodded anyway. Okay. She stepped away from the counter without argument and sat alone near the window overlooking the runway where rain shimmered against the tarmac lights outside. Her backpack rested quietly beside her feet. The silver aviation pin caught the light again for just a second. An older man sitting nearby noticed it this time. His eyes narrowed slightly in confusion before returning to his newspaper. Monica, meanwhile, leaned toward another flight attendant and whispered something that made both women laugh softly under their breath. Claire pretended not to notice. She folded her hands together in her lap and stared silently out at the massive aircraft waiting beyond the glass. Atlantic Crown Flight 88 to Los Angeles, the airline's newest flagship route. Around her, the lounge buzzed with expensive confidence and polished arrogance, but Claire remained perfectly still. Almost invisible. Almost. Because hidden inside the cream folder in her backpack was something Monica Hale never would have imagined. A signed acquisition agreement finalized less than 3 hours earlier in Manhattan. 51% controlling ownership of Atlantic Crown Airlines. And by the end of this flight, everyone in that lounge was about to learn exactly who Claire Bennett really was. Claire sat quietly beside the rain-speckled window while the private lounge continued moving around her like a world she was apparently never meant to enter. Waiters in pressed black uniforms carried silver trays of sparkling water and imported champagne between clusters of wealthy. Passengers discussing stock portfolios, vacation homes in Aspen, and business mergers worth more money than most people would see in a lifetime. Expensive perfume floated through the air beneath the soft scent of fresh espresso, while overhead speakers announced departures in calm, polished tones. Everything inside the lounge looked immaculate. Crystal glasses, leather chairs, marble counters glowing beneath warm, recessed lighting. And sitting in the middle of it all was Claire Bennett in a cream cardigan with sleeves slightly rolled at the wrists and white sneakers that had clearly seen years of use. She looked less like a first-class passenger and more like someone waiting for a delayed commuter train. Monica Hale thought exactly that as she watched her from behind the boarding counter. I still cannot believe seat 1A belongs to her. One of the younger attendants whispered quietly beside Monica. Monica crossed her arms. It probably does not, she replied under her breath. People manipulate airline systems more often than you think. Her eyes drifted toward Claire again. Calm, silent, hands folded neatly in her lap. No frantic phone calls. No defensive attitude. No attempt to prove herself. Somehow that irritated Monica more than open confrontation would have. Most embarrassed passengers either became angry or apologetic. Claire did neither. She simply waited. She does not even look nervous, the younger attendant murmured. Monica gave a short laugh. That is because people who do this usually rehearse confidence beforehand. Nearby passengers continued glancing toward Claire every few seconds now. Curiosity spreading quietly through the lounge. A man in a charcoal suit leaned toward his wife and muttered something that made her raise an eyebrow before looking toward Claire's backpack with visible skepticism. Another passenger openly stared at the faded fabric resting beside her chair as though it offended the atmosphere of luxury around them. Claire noticed every look, every whisper, every subtle expression that lingered half a second too long. But she kept her posture steady and her expression gentle. Outside the glass wall, lightning flickered faintly. Above the runway while airport vehicles moved through the rain below like tiny glowing insects. Claire watched them quietly, almost lost in thought. Monica walked out from behind the counter with deliberate confidence, heels tapping sharply across the polished floor. She stopped directly in front of Claire. Miss Bennett, she said, forcing another customer service smile. There appears to be a delay verifying your ticket. Claire looked up politely. I understand. Monica tilted her head slightly. You understand? There was almost disbelief in her tone, as though she expected Claire to panic. Yes, Claire answered softly. I am sure it will get resolved. Monica studied her carefully. There was something strangely composed about the young woman. Even now, after being publicly singled out in front of an entire luxury lounge, Claire still carried herself with quiet dignity. No bitterness, no sarcasm, no embarrassment beyond the faint pink still lingering in her cheeks. Monica glanced again toward the backpack near Claire's feet. You travel often? She asked casually. Sometimes. Business or personal? Mostly business. Monica nearly smiled at that. Business. The words sounded absurd coming from someone dressed like a graduate student carrying an old backpack with loose stitching near the zipper. Interesting, Monica replied. Most of our executive passengers tend to present themselves a little differently. Claire looked at her for a brief moment, understanding exactly what she meant. But her voice remained calm. Differently how? Monica gestured lightly around the lounge. This is a premium international service. Most passengers flying our flagship suites appreciate a certain standard. Claire lowered her eyes toward her cardigan sleeve for a moment. I see. Monica folded her arms again. Do not take it personally. People simply notice appearances. Claire gave the faintest nod. Yes, she said quietly. They usually do. For a split second, something about her response unsettled Monica. Not because it sounded angry. It did not. It sounded almost sad, like someone speaking from experience rather than offense. But Monica quickly brushed the feeling aside. Across the lounge, boarding for Flight 88 officially began. Passengers in tailored coats and luxury watches lined up beside the private boarding lane, while agents scanned tickets with polished efficiency. Claire remained seated alone by the window. Monica intentionally avoided calling her forward. One by one, the first-class passengers disappeared down the jet bridge until only Claire remained in the lounge with a few airport staff members. Finally, Monica approached her again, clipboard in hand. Miss Bennett, she said coolly, until verification is complete, we cannot allow boarding. Claire slowly stood, lifting her backpack onto one shoulder. How long will it take? Monica shrugged lightly. Hard to say. Security irregularities involving premium tickets are taken very seriously. The implication lingered heavily between them. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the backpack strap, but her voice never changed. My ticket was purchased legally. Monica smiled again, though this time the smile carried open condescension. I am sure you believe that. The younger attendant standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Even she seemed to realize the situation was becoming excessive. But Monica continued. Perhaps next time, she added softly, you should contact the airline beforehand if you are unfamiliar with premium travel procedures. Claire stared at her for a moment in complete silence. Not humiliated, not defeated, just quietly observing her. And somehow that calmness made Monica feel strangely defensive. Then Claire reached into the outer pocket of her backpack and removed her phone charger. As she did, the silver aviation pin clipped inside the bag became fully visible beneath the lounge lights for the first time. The younger attendant frowned immediately. Monica, she whispered carefully. That pin. Monica glanced down briefly. Her expression hardened almost instantly. Fake, she said dismissively before the other attendant could finish. People buy replica aviation memorabilia online all the time. But even as she said it, something about the pin bothered her. The silver wings were engraved with a tiny crown symbol almost nobody outside the company had ever seen. It was not standard merchandise. It was older, exclusive, rare. Claire noticed Monica staring at it. Quietly, she clipped the flap of the backpack closed again. Then she looked toward the boarding gate where the final passengers had already disappeared. Is Captain Mercer on board yet? She asked softly. Monica blinked in surprise. Why? Claire hesitated briefly. No reason. Monica narrowed her eyes immediately. You know the captain? Claire adjusted the strap on her shoulder again. Not exactly. The answer only deepened Monica's suspicion. And somewhere far beyond the lounge windows, thunder rolled quietly across the dark New York sky while the final boarding call echoed through the terminal. The private lounge had almost emptied by the time the storm outside intensified, rain streaking across the massive terminal windows, while distant lightning briefly illuminated the runway in pale silver flashes. Most first-class passengers were already settled on board Flight 88, sipping pre-departure champagne beneath soft cabin lighting somewhere beyond the jet bridge. Only a handful of people remained in the lounge now, and unfortunately for Claire Bennett, all of them seemed increasingly aware of her situation. Monica Hale stood beside the boarding desk reviewing something on her tablet with exaggerated professionalism, while two airport security officers lingered several feet away near the entrance. Their dark uniforms and crossed arms added a quiet pressure to the room, without either man saying a word. Claire noticed them immediately. Monica wanted her to notice them. A wealthy couple seated near the espresso bar continued glancing over every few seconds now. openly invested in the unfolding embarrassment. The husband leaned back in his leather chair, amusement visible behind his expensive reading glasses. "This is exactly why premium security matters," he muttered loudly enough for Claire to hear. His wife nodded faintly while stirring cream into her coffee. "People always try to sneak into spaces they cannot afford." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, but said nothing. The comments landed exactly where they were intended to. Monica pretended not to hear them, though the slight upward curl at the corner of her mouth revealed otherwise. The younger flight attendant from earlier shifted awkwardly beside the counter. "Maybe headquarters is just delayed responding," she whispered carefully. Monica barely looked at her. "Or maybe someone manipulated the booking system." Then she turned back toward Claire. "Miss Bennett," she said smoothly, "until verification is complete, airport security may need to remain nearby as a precaution." One of the security officers gave Claire a brief, polite nod, though his expression carried uncertainty rather than suspicion. He clearly did not understand why a quiet young woman in a cardigan was being treated like a potential threat inside a luxury lounge. But Monica's authority within the terminal carried weight. Claire slowly stood from her chair. Her backpack rested against her shoulder, while the cream-colored legal folder remained tucked carefully beneath her arm now. The edge of an embossed document seal was visible again under the lounge lights before she gently pressed the folder closed with one hand. Monica noticed the movement immediately. "What exactly is in that folder?" she asked. Claire looked down briefly. "Business documents." "Related to what?" Claire hesitated. "An acquisition." The businessman near the espresso bar laughed softly into his coffee. Monica gave a short smile of disbelief. "An acquisition," she repeated. "That sounds important." Claire simply nodded once. Monica stepped slightly closer now, lowering her voice just enough to sound patronizing rather than openly hostile. "Listen carefully, Miss Bennett. People here are becoming uncomfortable." Claire glanced around the nearly empty lounge. The wealthy couple immediately looked away when their eyes met hers. The security officers remained still near the entrance. The younger attendant avoided eye contact entirely. "I'm not trying to make this difficult," Monica continued. "But appearances matter in places like this. Premium passengers expect a certain atmosphere." Claire's fingers rested quietly against the edge of the folder beneath her arm. "And what atmosphere is that?" she asked softly. Monica folded her arms. "Professional. Refined. Exclusive." Claire looked down briefly at her white sneakers, then back toward Monica. "I see." There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just calm observation. Somehow that unsettled Monica more every minute. Because despite the pressure, despite the whispers and humiliation and obvious judgment filling the lounge, Claire still carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that refused to crack. Most people would have defended themselves by now. Most would have become emotional. Claire simply watched, thought, waited. Then she asked a question so calmly that even the security officers glanced toward her. "Has the board announcement been sent yet?" Monica blinked. "What?" Claire adjusted the folder lightly against her chest. "The executive board announcement. Has it gone public?" Monica stared at her for a second before letting out a small, incredulous laugh. "I think there is some confusion here." The businessman near the coffee bar smirked openly now. "Sounds like she thinks she owns the airline." A few quiet chuckles followed from nearby. Claire remained completely still. Monica shook her head slowly. "Miss Bennett, Atlantic Crown Airlines is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. This is not some local family business." Claire gave a faint nod. "I know." Monica exhaled sharply through her nose. "Then perhaps you should stop speaking in riddles and explain why you are carrying executive legal documents into a first-class lounge while claiming to know the captain." Claire glanced toward the storm outside again before answering. "Because I was told he should be informed personally." "Informed about what?" Monica asked immediately. Claire looked back at her. For the first time since arriving, there was something unreadable in her eyes. Not arrogance. Not fear. Something quieter. Heavier. "That depends on whether the paperwork finalized." The room went silent again. Even Monica seemed unsure how to respond now. The younger attendant looked increasingly uncomfortable while the security officers exchanged uncertain glances near the entrance. Claire slowly sat back down beside the window and placed the folder carefully on her lap. Then, almost absent-mindedly, She touched the old silver aviation pin clipped inside her backpack pocket with the tip of one finger. Her expression softened for just a second, like the object meant something deeply personal. The older businessman nearby noticed the gesture. His eyes narrowed slightly again. "Where did you get that pin?" he asked suddenly. Claire looked up politely. "It belonged to my father." Monica answered before anyone else could speak. Replica memorabilia is common online now. But the businessman did not look convinced anymore. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. "No," he murmured slowly. "I used to fly Atlantic Crown 30 years ago. That symbol." His voice trailed off as he stared toward the silver wings hidden partly beneath the backpack flap. Monica immediately interrupted. "Sir, I assure you everything is under control." Yet even as she said the words, uncertainty had started creeping quietly into her own mind. Because deep down, beneath all the judgment and assumptions and polished arrogance, one uncomfortable thought had finally begun pressing against the edge of Monica Hale's confidence. What if Claire Bennett really did belong here after all? The storm above New York deepened into a low rolling darkness outside the terminal windows, while the final boarding announcement echoed softly across the nearly empty lounge. Flight 88 was scheduled to depart in less than 20 minutes now, and tension hung in the air heavier than the thunder beyond the glass. Claire Bennett remained seated quietly near the runway view, the cream-colored legal folder resting neatly across her lap, while airport lights reflected against the rain behind her like scattered gold across black water. Monica Hale stood behind the boarding desk with growing irritation tightening her expression every time she looked toward Claire. What should have been a simple verification issue had somehow turned into an uncomfortable standoff that no longer felt entirely under Monica's control. The silver aviation pin still lingered in the back of her mind. The older businessman's reaction bothered her even more. But pride can be a dangerous thing once humiliation becomes public. Monica had already made assumptions in front of passengers, staff, and security. Backtracking now would mean admitting she had judged Claire incorrectly from the moment she walked through the lounge doors. And Monica Hale was not the kind of woman who admitted mistakes easily. The businessman near the espresso bar slowly stood and adjusted his tailored jacket. "Honestly," he said loudly while glancing toward Claire, "premium travel standards have changed dramatically over the years." His wife nodded in agreement. People used to respect these spaces. Claire heard every word. She simply lowered her hand gently over the folder on her lap and remained silent. Monica finally stepped out from behind the counter again, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor with renewed authority. This time her expression carried less polished politeness and more cold professional distance. "Miss Bennett," she said firmly, "we have not received confirmation from corporate regarding your boarding authorization." Claire looked up calmly. "My ticket already cleared payment. That is not the issue anymore." Monica folded her hands in front of her. "At this point, we are dealing with a broader security concern involving account verification." One of the younger attendants looked startled by the wording. Even the security officers near the entrance exchanged uncertain glances. Claire stood slowly, keeping the folder tucked against her side. "Security concern?" Monica nodded once. "Atlantic Crown reserves the right to deny boarding if irregularities create discomfort among premium passengers." The words settled heavily into the room. Not illegal, not aggressive, but humiliating in a quieter, colder way. The wealthy couple nearby watched openly now without pretending otherwise. Another late passenger walking through the lounge slowed slightly, curious about the scene unfolding near the counter. Claire glanced briefly toward the rain outside before returning her attention to Monica. "So I am being removed because I make people uncomfortable?" Monica's expression tightened. "Please do not twist my words. I am trying to understand them." Monica took a slow breath, forcing calm back into her voice. "This cabin serves executives, public figures, investors, and high-profile clients. Certain standards are expected." Claire looked down at her cardigan sleeve for a moment. "And I do not fit those standards." Monica did not answer directly. She did not need to. The silence itself answered clearly enough. The younger attendant shifted awkwardly again. "Monica, maybe we should wait for headquarters before asking her to leave." Monica's jaw tightened immediately. "The aircraft is already delayed." Then she looked directly at Claire. "Miss Bennett, I am going to ask you one final time to step out of the premium lounge while this matter is reviewed." The room fell quiet. Even the storm outside seemed distant for a moment. Claire slowly tightened her hand around the edge of the folder. Not angrily, not defensively, just thoughtfully. Then she asked one calm question. Has anyone from the executive office contacted the captain yet? Monica stared at her in disbelief. You keep mentioning executive offices and board announcements as if you were connected to this company. Claire met her eyes steadily. More connected than you realize. The businessman near the espresso bar laughed openly now. This is unbelievable. His wife shook her head with visible amusement. Maybe she thinks she is the new owner. Monica allowed herself a thin smile at that comment. Atlantic Crown Airlines has shareholders, legal boards, and billion-dollar investors, she said coolly. People do not simply walk in from the street and purchase companies overnight. Claire's expression never changed. Sometimes they do. The words landed softly, calmly. Yet something about the certainty in her voice caused the younger attendant to look toward Monica with visible concern. Monica ignored it completely. Miss Bennett, she said sharply now. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, airport management will become involved. One of the security officers stepped forward slightly, though his posture remained respectful rather than threatening. Claire looked toward him briefly and offered a small polite nod that immediately softened his expression. Then she turned back toward Monica. I am not trying to cause trouble. Then cooperate. Claire glanced once more toward the dark runway outside. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass beside the distant airport lights. For the first time all evening, a trace of exhaustion crossed her face. Not fear, not embarrassment, just disappointment. Do you know what my father used to say about this airline? She asked quietly. Monica crossed her arms. I do not believe your father is relevant to this conversation. Claire looked down at the silver aviation pin barely visible beneath the backpack flap. Her fingers brushed against it gently. He said the company would lose its soul the moment people started confusing luxury with human worth. The room went completely silent. Even Monica hesitated for half a second, because something about the way Claire said it did not sound rehearsed. It sounded personal, deeply personal. Then the lounge doors suddenly opened behind them, and a sharply dressed airport operations manager hurried inside, carrying a tablet in one hand. His expression looked tense. He glanced around quickly before locking eyes with Monica. There you are, he said under his breath while approaching fast. Corporate has been trying to reach the lounge for the last 10 minutes. Monica immediately straightened. Good, she said confidently. Perfect timing. We are in the middle of resolving a serious boarding issue. The manager barely acknowledged her response. His eyes had already shifted past Monica toward Claire Bennett, standing quietly near the window with the folder in her arms. And the moment he saw her face, the color visibly drained from his own. The operations manager stopped so abruptly that the polished leather soles of his shoes squeaked softly against the marble floor. Rain battered the terminal windows behind him, while the entire lounge seemed to hold its breath at once. Monica Hale noticed the sudden change in his face immediately. Confusion, recognition, alarm. He stared directly at Claire Bennett, standing quietly beside the window with the cream-colored folder held against her side. Then his eyes dropped toward the silver aviation pin attached inside her backpack. His expression tightened even further. Miss Bennett, he said carefully, almost breathless from rushing across the terminal. We have been trying to contact you. Monica blinked in disbelief. The younger attendant looked openly stunned now, while the wealthy couple near the espresso bar exchanged uncertain glances. Claire remained perfectly calm. I silenced my phone during the meeting, she answered softly. The manager gave a quick nervous nod. Of course. Monica stepped forward immediately, reclaiming control of her posture and voice. Excuse me, she interrupted sharply. This passenger's boarding authorization is under review due to multiple irregularities. The operations manager turned toward Monica slowly. Irregularities? Her identification raised concerns, Monica explained. And there have been questions regarding ticket verification and premium access authorization. The manager looked back toward Claire again, then toward the security officers standing nearby. Something about the scene clearly disturbed him now. I see, he murmured carefully. Monica folded her arms with renewed confidence, mistaking his hesitation for agreement. We were actually preparing to escort Miss Bennett out of the premium lounge until corporate could clarify the situation. The manager's face changed instantly at those words. Not anger, Something closer to panic, carefully hidden beneath professionalism. Escort her out, he repeated quietly. Claire spoke before the moment escalated further. It is all right, she said gently. There seems to have been some confusion. Monica forced another thin smile. Yes, confusion. But the operations manager was no longer listening to her fully. His eyes kept drifting toward the cream-colored folder in Claire's hands. One edge had shifted slightly open beneath her arm now, revealing a page stamped with dark blue corporate seals and several signatures across the bottom line. One signature in particular caught his attention immediately. William Bennett. The manager's face went pale. 30 years earlier, William Bennett's name had been legendary inside Atlantic Crown Airlines. Founder. Visionary. The man whose portrait still hung in the executive boardroom upstairs at headquarters in Manhattan. The same man whose private aviation insignia had once become the symbol of the airline itself before corporate rebranding modernized everything, including the old Silver Wings pin now clipped quietly inside Claire's backpack. Monica noticed the manager staring. Do you know her? She asked cautiously. He hesitated too long before answering. Then his phone vibrated sharply in his hand. The screen lit up with an incoming corporate call marked Executive Office Priority. Monica immediately straightened again. Perfect, she said confidently. That should settle this. The manager answered the call almost instantly, stepping several feet away toward the boarding counter while lowering his voice. But in the silence of the nearly empty lounge, fragments still carried clearly enough to hear. Yes, sir. She is here now. No, sir. She is not boarded yet. His eyes shifted toward Monica briefly. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. Monica's expression tightened slightly for the first time all evening. The businessman near the espresso bar lowered his coffee cup slowly now, no longer amused. The younger attendant looked between Monica and Claire with growing uncertainty. Claire herself remained completely composed. She gently placed the folder on the nearby chair and rested one hand lightly against it while waiting. No smugness, no satisfaction, just patience. The operations manager listened silently for another few moments before responding carefully. Understood. Yes, sir. I will handle it personally. Then the call ended. The room felt strangely colder somehow when he turned back around. Monica crossed her arms immediately. Well, she asked. The manager hesitated. Corporate requested that Miss Bennett remain here until additional confirmation arrives. Monica frowned. Remain here? Yes. So her ticket still has not been cleared. Another pause. That is not exactly the issue. Monica's confidence flickered for only a second before she forced it back into place. Then perhaps someone should finally explain what the issue actually is. The operations manager glanced toward Claire again before answering carefully. Miss Bennett's name appears on a restricted executive authorization list. The wealthy couple exchanged confused looks. Monica narrowed her eyes. Restricted? Meaning her travel profile requires executive-level handling. Monica gave a small, incredulous laugh. Executive-level handling for someone flying with a backpack and a cardigan? The manager did not laugh. That unsettled her more than anything else so far. Claire quietly reached into her backpack and removed a folded document from inside the cream folder. She handed it calmly toward the operations manager. You may need this too, she said softly. Monica caught a glimpse of the paper before he took it. At the top corner sat the Atlantic Crown corporate crest embossed in silver foil. Beneath it were the words Share Transfer Authorization. The manager scanned the first page quickly and visibly swallowed. Monica's expression hardened immediately. What is that? She demanded. Claire looked toward her politely. Paperwork. For what? Claire met her eyes steadily. For tomorrow morning. The answer only deepened the tension in the room. Monica stepped closer now, struggling to maintain authority while uncertainty slowly crept beneath her polished exterior. Miss Bennett, she said carefully, people do not receive executive authorization without significant connections to this airline. Claire tilted her head slightly. That is true. Monica waited. Claire said nothing more. The silence stretched painfully long. Then the older businessman who had recognized the aviation pin slowly stood from his chair near the espresso bar. His face had gone thoughtful now instead of amused. Bennett, he murmured quietly to himself. Wait a second. He looked directly at Claire. William Bennett would not happen to be. Claire's expression softened faintly at the mention of the name. My father, she answered gently. The room went completely silent. Monica Hale froze where she stood, because for the first time that evening, the certainty beneath her assumptions had finally begun to crack. For several long seconds after Claire Bennett quietly revealed William Bennett was her father, nobody in the premium lounge seemed to know how to react. Rain hammered softly against the terminal windows while distant thunder rolled across the runway outside. But inside the room, the silence felt heavier than the storm itself. The older businessman near the espresso bar slowly lowered himself back into his chair, no longer smiling. Even the wealthy couple who had spent the last half hour whispering judgments toward Claire now looked uncertain, exchanging nervous glances instead of amused ones. Monica Hale stood frozen beside the boarding counter, though only for a moment. Pride moved quickly to protect itself. Her expression hardened again almost immediately as she forced out a restrained laugh. William Bennett founded this airline over 30 years ago, she said coolly. Half the city knows his name. Claire remained calm. Yes. Monica folded her arms tightly. That does not explain why your boarding profile is flagged under executive handling or why you are carrying corporate legal documents. The operations manager shifted uncomfortably. Monica. No. Monica interrupted sharply without taking her eyes off Claire. I would actually like a clear explanation now. Claire glanced briefly toward the manager before looking back at Monica. You will receive one soon. Something about the answer only irritated Monica further. The calmness, the patience, the refusal to defend herself emotionally. Monica had spent the entire evening judging Claire as inexperienced, out of place, beneath the atmosphere of luxury around them. Yet somehow Claire continued speaking with the quiet confidence of someone who already understood how the night would end. Monica hated that feeling, hated the growing uncertainty spreading through the room. Soon, Monica repeated. With all due respect, Miss Bennett, people do not walk into a premium international lounge carrying mysterious legal paperwork and expect blind trust simply because they mention an important last name. Claire nodded faintly. That is fair. Monica blinked slightly, thrown off again by the lack of confrontation. But then her eyes dropped toward the cream-colored folder resting against Claire's side. Before anyone could react, Monica stepped forward and held out her hand. May I see the documents? The operations manager immediately looked alarmed. Monica, that is probably not appropriate. If this situation involves Atlantic Crown corporate matters, then I absolutely have the right to review materials affecting airport operations. Claire studied Monica quietly for a second. Then, without resistance, she handed over the folder. The room watched carefully as Monica opened it. Thick legal documents rested inside beneath silver-embossed dividers marked executive transfer authorization. Monica's expression remained skeptical at first while she scanned the opening pages. Then her eyes caught several signatures. Corporate attorneys, board approvals, international banking verification seals. The color in her face shifted slightly. Still, she kept flipping pages. These could still be preliminary negotiations, she said quickly, almost to herself. Corporate acquisitions happen constantly. The operations manager looked increasingly pale, standing beside her. Monica turned another page, then another. Finally, she stopped completely when a single line near the bottom caught her attention. Majority ownership transfer, 51% controlling interest. The lounge fell completely silent again. Monica stared down at the page for several seconds before looking back up slowly toward Claire. This is impossible, she whispered. Claire gently held out her hand for the folder. May I? Monica hesitated before giving it back. But instead of closing it, Claire calmly opened the folder herself and placed one specific document across the marble counter beneath the lounge lights. The silver corporate seal gleamed visibly now for everyone nearby to see. Along the bottom sat a finalized signature line stamped only 3 hours earlier in Manhattan. Claire Bennett. The older businessman stood halfway from his chair again, eyes widening behind his glasses. The younger attendant covered her mouth softly with one hand. Even the security officers near the entrance leaned forward slightly now. Monica stared at the signature as though refusing to process what sat directly in front of her. No, she said, quietly. There is no way. Claire looked toward the operations manager. Could you please ask them to refresh the executive registry? The manager nodded immediately and hurried toward the counter terminal with visible urgency. Monica finally snapped out of her shock enough to recover some of her sharpness. Do you honestly expect everyone here to believe you purchased Atlantic Crown Airlines today? Her voice carried louder this time. Colder. Defensive. People do not buy billion-dollar airlines carrying backpacks and wearing sneakers. The words echoed harshly across the quiet lounge. Nobody laughed this time. Claire slowly closed the folder. No, she answered softly. Most people who can afford to buy companies spend years trying to look rich enough first. Monica's jaw tightened. Claire carefully reached into the front pocket of her backpack again. This time she removed a small silver keycard attached to a leather tag embossed with the old Atlantic Crown insignia. Not the modern logo displayed across terminals today. The original founder's crest. The same symbol engraved on the aviation pin. She placed the keycard gently beside the folder. The operations manager saw it first and immediately stopped typing. That key, he murmured under his breath. Monica looked toward him sharply. What about it? He swallowed once. Executive access cards with that crest were discontinued over 20 years ago. Claire rested her fingertips lightly against the edge of the card. My father never stopped using his. The wealthy businessman near the espresso bar stared openly now. I remember those, he said quietly. Only the founder and executive board members had them. Monica's confidence visibly cracked for the first time all evening. But instead of backing down, she made the worst decision yet. She crossed her arms tightly and looked directly at Claire with cold disbelief. Even if these documents are real, she said carefully, this is still a premium airline lounge. Appearance matters. Professionalism matters. People here expect a certain image representing this company. The operations manager closed his eyes briefly as if physically pained by the comment. Because, the moment Monica finished speaking, every person in the lounge slowly realized exactly what she had done. She had just publicly lectured the possible new majority owner of Atlantic Crown Airlines about not looking wealthy enough to belong inside her own company. The silence inside the premium lounge became almost unbearable after Monica Hale finished speaking. Rain continued sliding down the massive terminal windows behind them while distant runway lights flickered across the polished marble floor, but nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Monica herself slowly realized what she had just said aloud in front of airport staff, security officers, and premium passengers. She had openly judged the possible new owner of Atlantic Crown Airlines based entirely on a cardigan, worn sneakers, and an old backpack. Yet pride still held her posture rigid. She refused to fully retreat from the position she had built all evening. Claire Bennett remained calm beside the counter, one hand resting lightly against the cream-colored legal folder while the old silver keycard sat beneath the lounge lights beside it. The founder's crest shimmered softly against the marble surface like a forgotten piece of history suddenly returned to life. Then a sharp notification sound broke the silence. The operations manager looked down at the terminal screen in front of him. His face immediately drained of color again. Monica noticed first. What is it? She asked tightly. He did not answer right away. His eyes scanned the screen once. Then again. Slowly, almost mechanically, he turned the monitor toward her. Monica stepped closer. At the very top of the executive registry page sat a flashing internal corporate notice marked immediate board authorization. Beneath it appeared a newly updated profile. Claire Alexandra Bennett, majority shareholder. Controlling ownership interest, 51%. Effective immediately. Monica stared at the screen without blinking. Around them, the atmosphere inside the lounge shifted instantly. The wealthy businessman near the espresso bar stood completely now, his expression transformed from skepticism into stunned recognition. His wife lowered her coffee cup carefully onto the table as though afraid to make noise. Even the security officers near the entrance straightened visibly, exchanging quick, uncertain looks before stepping back from Claire entirely. The younger flight attendant covered her mouth softly again. Oh my God, she whispered under her breath. Monica still could not seem to process what she was seeing. No, she murmured faintly. There has to be some mistake. The operations manager swallowed hard. There is no mistake. His voice had changed now too. Careful, respectful, almost nervous. The board finalized the transfer 3 hours ago in Manhattan. Monica slowly turned toward Claire. For the first time all evening, genuine uncertainty broke through the polished arrogance in her expression. You. Her voice faltered. Claire met her eyes quietly. My father founded Atlantic Crown Airlines 32 years ago, she said softly. After he passed away, most of his shares were divided among outside investors over time. The room remained completely silent as she spoke. This morning, Claire continued calmly, I finalized agreements to buy back controlling ownership of the company. Monica's face went pale. Claire did not raise her voice. She did not sound proud or triumphant. She simply stated the truth with quiet dignity. I came here tonight because Captain Mercer flew with my father for almost 20 years, she added gently. I wanted him to hear the news personally before the public announcement tomorrow morning. The older businessman slowly shook his head in disbelief. Daniel Mercer, he murmured. He was one of William Bennett's closest pilots. Claire nodded once. Yes. Monica glanced around the room as though searching desperately for support that no longer existed. But the atmosphere had completely changed now. The same passengers who had quietly mocked Claire earlier could no longer meet her eyes comfortably. The security officers stepped even farther back. The younger attendant looked visibly ashamed. The operations manager straightened his tie nervously before speaking directly to Claire. Miss Bennett, he said carefully, on behalf of Atlantic Crown Airlines, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you experienced this evening. Monica froze beside him. The words seemed to physically hit her. Claire looked toward the manager kindly. Thank you. Then the lounge doors suddenly opened once more. Several heads turned immediately as a tall man in a sharply pressed captain's uniform stepped inside, carrying his flight jacket over one arm. Captain Daniel Mercer. His silver hair reflected faintly beneath the warm lounge lighting, while rainwater still clung lightly to the shoulders of his dark navy coat from the storm outside. He looked irritated at first, clearly expecting a routine operational delay. What exactly is going on here? He asked while approaching the counter. Then his eyes landed on Claire Bennett. He stopped instantly. The color disappeared from his face so quickly it was almost shocking to watch. His flight jacket slipped slightly from his arm as he stared at her in complete disbelief. Claire, he whispered. The room went silent all over again. Claire gave him a small warm smile for the first time that evening. Hi, Daniel. Captain Mercer looked down toward the silver aviation pin clipped inside her backpack and then toward the founder's key card resting on the counter. His expression changed completely. Emotion, recognition, shock, respect. I cannot believe it, he said quietly. You actually did it. Monica looked between them helplessly now. Captain, you know her? Daniel Mercer turned slowly toward Monica. The silence before he answered felt endless. Know her? His voice remained calm, but something heavy sat beneath it now. I held her in my arms when she was 6 years old after her father christened our first transatlantic aircraft. Monica's face lost the rest of its color. Captain Mercer looked back toward Claire with visible emotion still lingering in his eyes. William used to tell everyone his daughter would save this company one day. Claire glanced quietly toward the rain-covered runway outside. I am hoping to save what it used to stand for. Nobody spoke after that, because every person in the lounge finally understood the full truth. The quiet young woman they had dismissed as someone who did not belong was not merely a wealthy passenger. She was now the most powerful person in the entire airline. The silence that followed Captain Daniel Mercer's words felt almost sacred. Rain continued tapping softly against the terminal windows while the distant glow of runway lights shimmered across the lounge floor, but inside the room nobody seemed capable of speaking. Monica Hale stood completely still near the boarding counter, her polished confidence finally shattered beneath the weight of the truth. Just 30 minutes earlier, she had looked Claire Bennett up and down with open dismissal. She had questioned her ticket, delayed her boarding, implied fraud, and publicly suggested she did not belong among wealthy passengers simply because she wore sneakers and carried an old backpack. And now every person in the lounge understood exactly who Claire really was. The founder's daughter, the new majority owner of Atlantic Crown Airlines. The woman who now held more authority over the company than anyone currently standing in the terminal. Monica slowly looked around the room as realization settled across every face watching her. The wealthy businessman near the espresso bar could no longer hide his discomfort. His wife stared down into her untouched coffee with visible embarrassment. The younger attendant looked close to tears. Even the security officers avoided eye contact now, clearly regretting allowing themselves to become part of the humiliation. Captain Mercer remained beside Claire, still visibly emotional from the shock of seeing her after so many years. "Your father would have been proud tonight," he said quietly. Claire gave a faint, sad smile. "I hope so." Monica swallowed hard before finally forcing herself to step forward. For the first time all evening, there was no superiority left in her posture. No polished arrogance. Only discomfort and regret. "Miss Bennet," her voice faltered slightly. Claire turned toward her calmly. Monica glanced briefly at the surrounding passengers before continuing. "I owe you an apology." The room stayed completely silent. Monica lowered her eyes for a moment, struggling visibly with the humiliation of saying the words. "Publicly, I made assumptions about you the moment you walked into this lounge," she admitted quietly. "I judged your appearance instead of your character, and I treated you unfairly because of it." Claire listened without interrupting. Monica's voice softened further. "I thought luxury meant recognizing status. I thought professionalism meant protecting an image." She looked briefly toward the old silver aviation pin resting beside the folder on the counter. "But I forgot what this company was actually built on." Captain Mercer slowly nodded beside Claire. "William Bennet used to walk through terminals wearing old denim jackets and carrying his own bags," he said quietly. "Half the executives underestimated him the first time they met him too." A few nervous smiles appeared around the room, though nobody laughed. The atmosphere no longer allowed it. Monica looked genuinely shaken now. "I am sorry, Miss Bennet," she said softly. "Not because of who you are. Because of how I treated you before I knew." The words lingered heavily in the lounge. Claire studied her for a long moment. Then she gently closed the legal folder and picked up the old silver aviation pin from beside it. She turned the small object carefully between her fingers beneath the warm lounge lights. "Do you know why my father kept this design?" she asked quietly. Monica shook her head slightly. Claire looked toward the silver wings. "Because he believed airlines were supposed to make people feel welcome, not important." The room went completely still again. Claire clipped the pin back onto her backpack before continuing softly. "He grew up working at a gas station in Oklahoma. The first time he flew on a commercial airplane, a flight attendant treated him like he did not belong because his suit came from a thrift store." Monica lowered her eyes immediately. "He never forgot how that felt," Claire said. "And he promised himself that if he ever built an airline, people would be treated with dignity before status." Captain Mercer exhaled quietly beside her. "That sounds exactly like William." Claire looked back toward Monica, but there was no cruelty in her expression, no triumph. "You were not wrong for protecting your airline," she said gently. "But somewhere along the way, protecting the image became more important than respecting the people." Monica's eyes watered slightly now. The younger attendant looked down, visibly ashamed of her own silence throughout the evening. Claire noticed. "This is not only about one person," she added calmly. "Most unfair treatment survives because everyone nearby decides to stay quiet." The businessman near the espresso bar slowly stood from his chair. His face had gone red with embarrassment. "Miss Bennet," he said carefully, "I would like to apologize as well. My wife and I made comments earlier that we should not have made." His wife nodded quickly beside him. "We judged you unfairly." Claire gave them both a polite nod. "Thank you." The operations manager stepped forward nervously. "Miss Bennet, if there is anything we can do to make this right tonight." Claire looked around the luxurious lounge one more time. The marble floors, the champagne glasses, the expensive luggage, the people who had spent the evening measuring worth through appearances. Then she quietly shook her head. "Treat the next person better before you know who they are," she said softly. That would be enough. Nobody spoke after that, because the simplicity of her words carried more weight than anger ever could. Captain Mercer finally glanced toward the departure screen overhead. "Flight 88 is still waiting for clearance," he said carefully. "Whenever you are ready, Miss Bennet, it would be an honor to welcome you on board." Claire smiled faintly and lifted her backpack onto her shoulder. The same faded backpack Monica had once looked at with open disdain now seemed strangely symbolic beneath the soft lounge lighting. Simple, unimpressive, yet carrying documents capable of changing the future of an entire airline. As Claire walked toward the private boarding gate beside Captain Mercer, every employee in the lounge instinctively straightened. Monica stepped aside quietly, unable to meet Claire's eyes for a moment. Then Claire paused beside her. "Monica," she said gently. Monica looked up immediately. "Yes." Claire's voice remained calm. The most valuable people in a company are usually the ones nobody notices right away. Monica's expression tightened with emotion. Claire gave her one final small nod before continuing toward the jet bridge. And as the lounge doors slowly closed behind her, the room remained wrapped in a silence that felt less like humiliation now, and more like a lesson nobody there would ever forget. The jet bridge stretched quietly ahead beneath soft white lighting as Claire Bennett walked beside Captain Daniel Mercer toward the waiting aircraft. Behind them, the premium lounge remained unusually silent long after the doors had closed. Nobody rushed back to conversations. Nobody returned comfortably to coffee or business calls. The atmosphere had changed too deeply for that. Monica Hale still stood near the marble counter watching the empty doorway where Claire had disappeared moments earlier, her posture stiff with the weight of everything that had happened that night. The silver rain beyond the terminal windows reflected softly across the polished floor, while the old founder's crest remained burned into her thoughts. She had spent years believing luxury meant appearance. Tailored suits, designer luggage, expensive confidence. Yet the person who now controlled the future of Atlantic Crown Airlines had arrived wearing a cream cardigan and carrying an old backpack with loose stitching near the zipper. And somehow that realization hurt more than any public reprimand could have. Near the espresso bar, the wealthy businessman slowly exhaled and shook his head. "I spent 30 years teaching my sons to recognize successful people," he murmured quietly to his wife. "Turns out I never really knew what success looked like." His wife stared silently into the rain beyond the windows. The younger attendant behind the counter finally looked toward Monica. "You really did not know?" she asked softly. Monica swallowed once before answering. "No," the younger woman hesitated. She never acted angry. Monica looked down at the marble floor. That was the worst part. Farther down the jet bridge, Claire walked calmly beside Captain Mercer, while airport employees stepped respectfully aside as they passed. Some recognized her now from the corporate alert spreading rapidly through executive channels. Others simply sensed the unusual gravity surrounding the quiet young woman with the faded backpack and silver aviation pin. Yet Claire's pace never changed. She still carried herself exactly the same way she had when she first entered the lounge earlier that evening. Calm, modest, grounded. Captain Mercer glanced toward her as they approached the aircraft door. "You know," he said gently, "most people in your position would have demanded someone lose their job tonight." Claire adjusted the strap on her backpack slightly. Would that fix what happened? Daniel considered the question for a moment before giving a small smile. "You sound exactly like your father." Claire looked down briefly at the old silver pin attached near the backpack pocket. "He used to tell me something when I was little." "What was that?" Claire's expression softened faintly. "He said character is revealed most clearly in moments when nobody thinks kindness is necessary." Captain Mercer nodded slowly. William Bennett believed this company should make ordinary people feel respected. Claire glanced through the aircraft doorway ahead where the first-class cabin glowed warmly beneath soft amber lighting. Then somewhere along the way, she said quietly, people started confusing wealth with worth. As they stepped on board, the entire cabin crew immediately straightened. Word had already spread through internal communications faster than anyone expected. Several flight attendants who had prepared the cabin moments earlier now looked visibly nervous upon seeing Claire enter beside Captain Mercer. But Claire simply smiled politely and thanked each crew member who greeted her. No grand entrance. No arrogance. No display of power. Just quiet dignity. Monica Hale, meanwhile, remained alone in the lounge after most passengers had finally boarded. The operations manager stood beside the counter reviewing terminal updates before turning toward her carefully. "Corporate will likely request a formal report tomorrow morning," he said. Monica nodded faintly. "I understand." He hesitated. "For what it is worth. I do not think Miss Bennett wants revenge." Monica looked toward the dark jet bridge entrance. "That almost makes it worse." The manager frowned slightly. Monica folded her arms loosely now, no longer defensive. "Just thoughtful." "If she had yelled at me," Monica admitted quietly, "I could have dismissed it as anger. But she never once tried to humiliate anyone back." Her voice lowered further. "She just let everyone see themselves clearly." The operations manager said nothing after that because there was nothing left to say. On board Flight 88, Claire settled quietly into seat 1A beside the rain-covered window while Captain Mercer prepared for departure. The cream-colored legal folder rested neatly beside her now, its silver corporate seals reflecting softly beneath the cabin lights. Around her, first-class passengers avoided staring too openly, though many still glanced toward her with completely transformed expressions. Not because of fear, because of respect. The wealthy businessman from the lounge eventually boarded and paused beside Claire's seat before continuing down the aisle. "Miss Bennet," he said carefully, "thank you for the lesson tonight." Claire looked up politely. "I think all of us learned something." He nodded once before walking away in silence. A few moments later, the younger attendant from the lounge quietly approached Claire's seat carrying a small handwritten note. "Miss Bennet," she said nervously, "I just wanted to apologize for not speaking up earlier." Claire accepted the note gently. "Thank you for saying that." The young attendant hesitated before asking softly, "Why did you keep dressing simply even after becoming this successful?" Claire looked out the rain-streaked window for several seconds before answering. "Because the people who truly love you do not need proof." The attendant's eyes watered slightly as she nodded and stepped away. Soon afterward, Captain Mercer's calm voice echoed through the cabin announcing final departure preparations. Outside, airport lights shimmered across the wet runway while thunder slowly faded into the distance beyond New York City. Claire reached into her backpack one last time and removed the old silver aviation pin. For a moment, she simply held it in her palm beneath the warm cabin light. Then she clipped it carefully onto the seat pocket in front of her, where it caught the glow softly, like a quiet reminder from another generation. William Bennett's original wings. A symbol built not on wealth, but on dignity. As the aircraft finally began moving away from the gate, Claire looked silently through the rain-covered glass while the city lights blurred into silver streaks beyond the runway. And somewhere back inside the terminal, people who had once measured human worth by clothing, status, and appearances sat quietly with a truth they would never forget again. Respect was never supposed to belong only to the powerful, because sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody notices at first.